We're back for your ears only. I'm Eddie Robinson.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news, "Make-believe voodoo magic." That was a federal bank regulator's May 2012 email on J.P. Morgan Chase ignoring internal controls and manipulating documents in purported hedge trading that amassed a $6 billion loss, as revealed in a Senate investigation. Left open the question whether Chase boss Jamie Dimon was complicit with improper reporting procedures. Also last week, J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs were ordered to rearrange their resources for dealing with future reversals. Now this.
You see, balancing the budget is not simply an act of arithmetic, not just getting expenditures and revenues to add up. Balancing the budget is a means to an end. It's a means to a healthier economy, a pro-growth society, a pro-growth economy that delivers opportunity.
This approach, in fact, was on the ballot last November. Voters around the country rejected it. Instead, they want an approach that puts the middle class first, that returns our nation to the fiscal and economic policies that have worked for this country before by focusing on jobs and the economy, cutting spending responsibly, and calling on the wealthiest Americans to pay their fair share.
As if the presidential campaign of 2012 never ended, defeated Republican vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan last week presented a House GOP budget plan that echoed the party's lower taxes, less spending vision of economic dynamism. And Democrat Patty Murray countered with a Senate plan more focused on her party's view of fairness, with more taxes, but also less spending to deal with the mounting long-term deficit.
Neither approach, however, did much to confront an underlying problem of all developed countries, growing income inequality and the dangers it represents. Even as the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit a new high of 14,539, and new jobless claims fell to a 5-year low, financial benefits were enjoyed more and more going up the income ladder and little at all from the middle down. The threat is not only to the consumerism that drives America's economy, but ultimately to popular acceptance of the system itself. A study of the problem by Professor Jerry Muller, chairman of the History Department at Washington's Catholic University of America, appears in the current issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, published by the Council on Foreign Relations. And for your ears only, Professor Muller joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Thanks. It's good to be with you.
What are the latest figures on how unevenly the country's economic growth is shared?
Some of the best figures that we have are from the period between 1973 and 2001. So that's 28 years. During those years, the average annual growth in real income for people in the bottom fifth of the income distribution was 0.3%. And for people in the middle fifth of the income distribution, it was 0.8%. And for people in the top fifth of the income distribution, it was 1.8%. But the rate of increase for people in the middle fifth was more than twice as fast as for the people at the bottom. And the rate of increase for those in the top fifth was more than twice as fast as for those in the middle. And it was 6 times as fast as for those in the bottom fifth. So everybody might have been getting better off, but inequality was increasing. And since then, since 2001, of course, we've had the period of the Great Recession intervening. And during that period, things have probably gotten somewhat more unequal. And at least as importantly, the situations have grown more insecure for many people.
The world has always had rich and poor, princes and paupers. What were the major changes that industrialization and capitalism brought to make that gap ever wider?
Well, they didn't. The coming of capitalism and industrialization didn't make the gap even wider. In some respects, it made things more equal in that over time, over the course of a couple of hundred years, many sorts of goods and services that were once only available to the rich, including having enough food to eat and enough clothing to wear and so on, became available to everybody. But capitalism has always been based upon a certain degree of inequality, as some people did better than others for a variety of reasons, and it's tended to be quite dynamic as new means of producing things and distributing things and consuming things get introduced, and those people or companies who introduce those things first and most successfully tend to be disproportionately successful.
But you say today's globalization makes economic insecurity worse and pushes inequality higher up the income ladder.
Not Globalization does, but not just globalization. That's one of those generalizations that turns out to be only a half-truth. It's partly due to technological changes that with greater degrees of automation, greater uses of computers, and so on, it means that people who have higher levels of education or skills tend to get better rewarded. And those people who have lower levels of education or lower levels of skills, or to put it another way, whose main contribution is through their physical attributes, tend to do worse. So that's because of technological factors, and all of that is then exacerbated by globalization, which means that, among other things, that physical labor tends to be worth actually less and less in societies like the United States, because in a sense workers are competing with workers from abroad who can do a lot of those functions at lower rates of wages. And then there's another factor that increases insecurity, and that's the kind of financialization that our economy's undergone in the last few decades, which means I won't go into all the details of it, but it means that companies increasingly feel like they're under the gun to make a profit, and as much profit as possible every quarter, and that's tended to lead to greater job insecurity for many people.
To the degree that even people at the bottom are doing in absolute terms better, I guess we don't have to look forwards to a real revolution against the capitalist system itself. But short of that, to what degree does a yawning gap between the very rich and all the rest undermine the consumer confidence and actual consumption that drives sales, production, investment under the current system?
That's hard to say. You know, there are people who have made that argument that it's well known that people lower down on the income scale tend to spend a higher percentage of their income, more or less because they have to make ends meet. But two things should be kept in mind. You can have an economy that is based in good part on catering to the consumer needs of people in the top half of the income distribution. I think the notion of the top 0.1% is one factor to be considered, but the much larger process is one of increasing inequality that has to do really in some ways with the bottom third, the middle third, and the top third of our population. And it's possible that the economy can get along in terms of consumer demand by focusing more on that top third. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the money for investments comes mostly from profits, and those profits accrue mostly to the people in the top third of the income distribution. So there is this kind of redistributionist argument saying that there isn't going to be enough consumer demand because of the degree of inequality, but I'm not sure that the actual record of the economy really bears that out.
Professor Jerry Muller is chairman of the History Department at Washington's Catholic University of America. His essay on income inequality appears in the current issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, published by the Council on Foreign Relations.
Quote from the news, "I am not a sixth grader." That was Senator Dianne Feinstein of California responding to a lecture on the Second Amendment by Republican Ted Cruz of Texas in connection with Feinstein's bill banning assault-style weapons. It was passed by the Senate Judiciary Committee on a strict party-line vote, but is given little chance of getting much further.
Next, hostile allies in Afghanistan, for your ears only.